So let's start by introducing ourselves. Rita, you are the first one in the chat.
Well, thank you very much for having us today, Teresa. So my name is Rita Irwin. I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, and I'm a past president of InSEA. So I was a president of InSEA, and as a result of that, I was on the World Alliance for Arts Education for a number of years while I was president and past president, and before Teresa became president. Is that good?
Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. Sanja?
My name is Sonia Krismanovich Tasić. I'm from Belgrade, Serbia, and I'm the current president of FIDEA, International Drama, Theatre and Education Association, since December 2020. And I have been part of the World Alliance for Arts Education since May 2021. Because our past immediate president, Robin Pascoe, was still part of this presidential chair, or I don't know what is the correct name. I'm very honored to be here with you, and I'm very curious to hear firsthand from your testimonies about the development of this very, very important alliance that I think makes a change and works on advocacy for arts education.
Thank you, Sanja. Tintti?
Hi, I am Tintti Karpinnen from Finland, FIDEA, and I had the pleasure to be the vice one when Larry was the president. In FIDEA, and I was working with Diederik and Einar Salbu in Paris before there was any WAAE. And at the moment, I'm still working in FIDEA very much, and I prepare now for our Congress for Iceland, Reykjavik.
Thank you.
Sorry that I am a black and white person now. I don't know why.
You are beautiful. And Larry?
Hi, I'm Larry O'Farrell, and I was president of IDEA before Dan, and Dan was the president at the time that WAAE was formed. What I can probably talk a little bit about during our conversation is the Seoul agenda, because I was involved in writing the Seoul agenda as the general rapporteur of the World Conference in 2010 in Seoul, Korea. But also I was very much involved with the first World Conference, yes, it was called a conference, in Lisbon in 2006. And was present during the sort of inaugural time. Also, I've attended several, or at least a number of WAAE events, including, I think, the first WAAE separate conference or meeting was the one in Hong Kong, was it not? Yes, and so thank you. So I was there, and so I can say that I was sort of at the beginning of WAAE without being personally responsible. Right now, I'm still chair of the board of the Canadian Network for Arts and Learning, which is an organization that actually grew out of the very first World Conference in Lisbon. We came, a bunch of Canadians were there. We came home, we said we should continue this work in Canada, and we established an organization that would do that. And we're still running, we're still operating, and going from grant to grant, as do so many not-for-profit organizations.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you so much. Doug?
Hello, I'm Doug Boughton. I'm currently director of the School of Art and Design at Northern Illinois University. I was president of InSEA from 2003 to 2006, so I take partial responsibility for the initial development of the idea of the World Alliance and the the implementation of the first steps, I guess, along with Dan and Gary McPherson, who isn't able to be here. But all of this was kind of embedded on the good work, or came from the good work that Diederik did initially to initiate conversations about the possibility. So it took us some years. My memory is not as good as it used to be, but I can remember a few things about what happened at the beginning, and I'm looking forward to talking about how we got started on this.
Thank you, Doug. And Diederik?
Yes, okay, well, thank you very much for this very special event. And it's very nice to see all of you back again, some after many years. And this reminds me of the period that all this cooperation between the organizations started. I'm very pleased that Tintti is here, because as you already mentioned, in December 1999, that was in the last century, UNESCO was convening in Paris for a meeting on the arts and education. And believe it or not, the three organizations were invited to take part. We all had one or more less relationship with UNESCO, and we got in touch before that conference, and we decided not to give our independent talks and presentations, but we said, okay, now we have the possibility, the opportunity to present as educational organizations in the arts, we should present jointly. So we made a kind of chat like Huey, Dewey, and Louie that was presented on the platform of UNESCO building in Paris. And there Tintti and Einar Solbu from ISME and my person, we were giving a presentation on the relevance and the need to really include the art education organizations in any discussions when it comes to the relevance of arts in education. And well, I hope it helped. It was a very interesting meeting at that moment, because also Einar was able to organize some music to support our presentation on the platform. And well, we really enjoyed it very much, and I hope so the public as well. But at least that really started the cooperation between the three organizations. And I cannot really remember how it followed in the years afterwards, but I do know that already in 2002, we were really working towards a kind of formal, let's say, cooperation and situation that finally, it took some time, also due to all kinds of circumstances, took place in Frisau in 2006, when I remember there, because being there, the final agreement was signed by Doug, and Dan was there too. So that's my part of the memory. And afterwards, I have been at some conferences, but only as a kind of guest, because by that date, I already resigned from InSEA in 2006. And thanks to time, I have retired by now, but still very much interested and hopeful about the need and the opportunities to cooperate as organizations worldwide to really improve the situation for the arts in education in general. So this is my historical contribution, and I'm very pleased that Tintti at least is there too.
Can I add that between Lisbon Congress and that UNESCO 1998, there were several, no, not several, but some regional meetings in Brazil, Uberaba, and then it was for Latin America, and they also made a publication after that, and as well as for ocean area, Australia and Fiji and New Zealand and so, and also that made a publication, and Robin Pascoe was there as well.
Yeah, that's a good addition, because we were the three Europeans more by luck starting it, because we all live more or near to Paris. But yeah, the idea and the initiative was taken over worldwide. And I think, for instance, Dan has taken an important role in that in South America, and others in the other parts of the world. And I think that really proved the necessity, but also the timeliness of how do you say, the timely decision to work on cooperation worldwide.
Yeah, and it was a follow-up of that ocean regional meeting that UNESCO was the initiator for the regional meetings. And Teresa Wagner asked me to organize the European Arts in Education
Yes,
Congress.
I remember.
That was in 2003 here in Finland.
Yeah. I remember your sauna, Tintti, yes.
Yeah, that's great stories. Joachim?
Yeah, I can only echo because I also remember Tintti's sauna and in 2003. And this was, in fact, the entrance of me into this evolution, into this into this development. And because I am a member of our national association in Germany, our National Drama and Theatre Teachers Association in Germany has joined IDEA only 2002. So it was only 1 year for me later that I was in this first meeting according to UNESCO. And well, I don't want to tell you what you already said. I remember what, for me, it was a really interesting moment, or no, it was one of the worst moments when we were invited to UNESCO, and that was my first time being invited to UNESCO in Paris, in the headquarters, when they told us that they cancel their department of arts education and so on. And since then we didn't only have all these wonderful summits from Hong Kong on, and I joined them all, I think without the Australian one. And that was my motivation to organize the Frankfurt conference in 2019. Yeah.
Microphone, Teresa.
Thank you, Joachim. Thank you. Dan, can you be the last one?
Sure. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. And to say thanks to you, Teresa, for bringing us together again. That's how I remember Viseo in many ways. It's good actually for me to even learn here some of the steps that were taken. Of course, I knew that Tintti and Diederik had been very active, but I remember, Viseo as the kind of entry point for me as the then IDEA president. And I would just say it's great to see everyone again. They were very, very kind of visionary moments, but in a time as well when we felt it was an urgent step to really dialogue with UNESCO in a new way. So I'm speaking from the community universities of the University of the Rivers in the Brazilian Amazon, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Thank you, Dan. So here is the team. What a team. So to start our conversation, I just want to tell a story before. So I'm Teresa. I'm from Portugal. I was the InSEA, I'm InSEA past president, like Rita. And now I'm representing InSEA in the Alliance. And I remember in 2005, maybe, Doug and Diederik and John said, maybe it's a good idea to make a World Congress for InSEA. And maybe it would be a good idea to invite the other organizations, because we are working with UNESCO and there is an interest. I remember some story about it. There is an interest in joining our forces. And Diederik, you remember that you sent me to Paris to that meeting. And at the time, UNESCO was preparing the first summit on art education. And so Diederik and Doug, they sent me to Paris, and I was there. And I understood it was really important. And it was the moment to join the forces. So when I was organizing this Congress for InSEA, I just followed their suggestions. And I invited Gary from ISME and Dan from IDEA. And we signed this memorandum. And for me, I think this was the starting point for the Alliance. I'm not sure if you agree with that.
I think it was an interesting coalescence of circumstances that sort of fired the whole thing. It was all of the things that had happened beforehand, the work that Diederik and others had been doing. And when we were coming to talk about the World Congress, it seemed to me a good idea I actually called Dan in Brazil. I don't know if you recall that, Dan, and said,
I remember well.
I think we need to have a conversation. Would you like to come to Portugal for the World Congress? And you jumped on the invitation and said yes. And so I called Gary McPherson, which wasn't so hard because Gary, A, is an Australian, and B, was living about 2 hours from me in Illinois, the University of Illinois. And he was all excited about getting on board with this too. So we decided to meet together in Viseu and hammer it out. But I think the thing that really brought the thing to a boil was the development of the roadmap to the future that UNESCO is putting together. And that document was the thing that we were most concerned about in that document was the policy recommendations for the delivery of arts to all kids at all levels of schooling, but through partnerships with artists rather than foregrounding the professional work of teachers who were trained to be teachers. And so we were really, really concerned about that. And I think that's what gave energy to the development of the alliance agreement. It was some very interesting times, late nights. I remember Dan and Gary spending late nights working on the document and bringing it to us in the morning to discuss. I actually discovered that I was ill in Portugal. I didn't realize what it was at the time, but I had a heart problem, atrial fibrillation, so I was kind of whacked. And I didn't discover until 6 months later what was wrong with me. But at the same time, it was very exciting to get together to work on this. And then we brought we created the memorandum, and I took it to the annual general meeting of InSEA, and we put it to the membership for ratification on the assumption that the document would go to the other organizations for ratification afterwards. And one of the things that I remember most clearly standing on the stage with the two guys was Elizabeth Grierson from Australia complained that we were all men. I don't know if you remember that, Teresa, but I said all we could do was blame our fathers because they were responsible. And we got the document ratified and decided to take it to Lisbon, and where it was read. I remember when we did that, the senior management at UNESCO were very displeased with us. They didn't like this at all, and they didn't like us being critical of the policy document. I've got some stories about the roundtables that I can talk about, but I'll give somebody else a chance to chime in. Maybe Dan, you have some memories of those early moments.
Yeah, no, I think they're very special in many ways. I regret that Gary's not here because I think we drank a couple of bottles of wine that night.
At least.
As we turned. I think you'd accept this to be fair, that we turned a very rigorous and quite academic document to begin with into a kind of advocacy document. So we were looking at how we could give it a turn of phrase, which would be not just lucid, but also very, very, very committed, very engaged. And my recollection is, in addition to what you've said, Doug, I think there was a certain kind of indignation, which I shared quite recently in Frankfurt. It wasn't just the content, but was the fact that we were being asked to sign a document, to endorse a document that we hadn't seen. And this was at the very beginning of the World Conference, rather than as a result of dialogue and debate between us and with UNESCO. So I think this was my first experience of what I now know is quite a common practice within United Nations organizations, which is that a letter or a document, a declaration is prepared, and then that becomes a concluding outcome, if you want, of the conference. But I remember it was I was surprised that as the youngest president in this presidential council, I was surprised at how such moderate and kind of generous people were really indignant. And I think that indignation, first of all, we brought back, as you said, the next day, a document that had been, in a way, sculpted to have a real impact beyond the hall where we were meeting, to speak to all of the different associations and different members. But I remember we had I think we translated that indignation into one verb, which is that we challenge UNESCO to live up to its founding ideals. I think that verb challenge, I was called at 6 a.m. Because I had read the document, and I think I was invited to read the document because I was from drama and theatre education. So there was an understanding or an expectation that I would give it a kind of interpretation which would be, would be impactful. But I remember when we went to that meeting at 11 or 10 in the morning with UNESCO, they asked us to remove that verb. And they asked us to find a more conciliatory tone, actually Max Wyman, who was present from Canada, said, "No one tells UNESCO." I'm not going to quote him exactly because the words were very, very angry. But he said, "No one tells UNESCO. No one challenges UNESCO." And I think we had gone through an important process within Viseo to consult all the people within InSEA to approve the Alliance document. But we had gone through a process of consultation, which meant we couldn't change any part of that document without going through that consultation again, just to respect the members. And it meant that we were able to say to UNESCO at that time, look, we'll take all of these debates further, but for this moment, that Alliance declaration stands. And I think I understand this, and I've said this to people in IDEA, I said it in Frankfurt quite recently. I think that announced a different kind of collaborative relationship with UNESCO. We weren't being invited to be present, but we were actually talking about the importance of working as equals with UNESCO. And I think that was important, but I also think that it gave real, not just authority, but kind of energy to a time, if you remember it, we seem, in looking back, quite naive that we were talking about technological convergence and we were talking about a world that was coming. But we weren't talking about climate change or climate collapse, but we were talking about the difficulties of a whole paradigm of education in a time of paradigm shift. And so I think the tone of the document coincided with the context in which we were meeting, and which I think UNESCO responsibly responded to.
Yeah, I can add to the discomfort that we had with UNESCO with the roundtable procedures, the roundtable sessions. I was asked to chair one of them, and it was about advocacy, policy, and new literacy. And the way that UNESCO operated was very manipulative. They sent a recorder to each of the roundtables, and I asked after the session was completed, could I view the document that the recorders were preparing to document what was said? And they said, no, I couldn't see it. I said, but yes, I want to see it because I'm the chair and I want to make sure that it's an accurate representation of what was said. And I got pushback until I became rather firm and said, I insist that I see this. So they said, all right, then you can go to the pool where they had a group of people who were documenting, writing up these sessions, and you can see it at about 10 o'clock in the evening when we're done. And I saw it, and I insisted on some change in the document because it was clearly pushing for the UNESCO line, the particular UNESCO view of policy that they wanted to embed in the roadmap, which was contrary to what we had said in our statement at the beginning. And I made them change it. And they got very angry with me. But it was done, and the report did come out. It was reported the way that we wanted it reported at the session, at the final session at UNESCO. But I did notice that following the UNESCO session, that the actual written report of the sessions were changed back to the way that they wanted it to be. So the whole point, the whole UNESCO point was politically motivated effort on the part of ministers of culture in the various states that were represented at the conference to find employment for artists. It was going to satisfy the political difficulties that the various countries were facing with artist unemployment. So it was quite a struggle that we had.
Mm-hmm. Teresa, can I just mention one last detail? Oh, sorry, Larry, I didn't see. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that when we get to talk about the Seoul Agenda, the Second World Conference, that the picture is very different picture. So, and I give full credit to those of you who prepared that first document, because I think it was heard, and while the UNESCO process rolled on, it rolled on with a very different receptivity to the ideas that were being presented. Perhaps there wasn't so much political stress at that time, but it was a very different picture for the second one.
Okay. I think it was the power of the alliance that the UNESCO realized that we had a constituency, if you take into account all of the affiliated groups, of about 1 million arts teachers worldwide, if you add up the various groups that were represented in the alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, quite the story. Doug, do you have the photo of the signature of the memorandum? You told me you have the photo you want to show.
Oh, no, it's on the WAAE website.
Yeah, it's on the page, yeah.
Yeah, no, there was a photo of Dan and Gary and me and Diederik on stage at the signing of the document, where we all had darker hair and looked much more handsome than we do now. Okay. But it's a nice pictorial documentation of the event, which I think was a momentous moment, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was. Okay.
Well, the good thing is, and I want to stress this, that this UNESCO conference was taking place in Lisbon in 2006. And it was thanks to Teresa that we were able to have this InSEA Congress just the week before, or the days before, organized. And that was quite a challenge. And she made it possible because that really gave us all the impetus to work on this cooperation and to join together and go to Lisbon. And that was a very nice joining of forces. And I really want to congratulate Teresa for she made it happen in Vissau. And otherwise, I think I do not know what would have happened to our alliance, because then we would all have entered in Lisbon independently, and I don't know how it would have ended. So thank you very much, Teresa, for giving us the time to prepare our meeting in Lisbon.
Yeah, wow, it was really a pleasure. So what I understand is that the mission, the initial mission, was really to join force, to have a position and standing to UNESCO. So this was the first mission of the Alliance, right?
Mm-hmm. to be heard as representatives of arts education in general,
So
and
it's
not as
stronger.
independent groups that have their own agenda. No, we have a common agenda. That was new to UNESCO.
Yeah, and recognizing the professional contribution of teachers to the arts, you know, instead of, you know, valuing, of course, the virtue of partnerships, but putting at first foregrounding the professional roles of teachers.
Mhm.
I think when we were summoned to that morning meeting, they expected us all to walk out before the UNESCO conference had begun. They had interpreted the tone of the declaration as a tone of confrontation, whereas in actual fact, it was a declaration that we would work as partners. And I remember that they tried at one point to speak individually to us. And I think we were there saying we will sit together and we will speak as an alliance for the first time.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to say what Diederik has said. My recollection, Teresa, is that you brought us together. I had forgotten what Doug said, that there was that phone call, we had a meeting. I remember, Doug, we met for the first time, and it was, it was an experience of talking to another world association or another world society. It was the first time that there had been a kind of conversation about policy and about a shared vision. But I do remember, Teresa, that I remember all of the, it seemed to me the had come from the Viseu conference.
Yeah, I remember it was kind of polemic also, because for certain people they said, I have nothing to do with those drama people, and I have nothing to do with the music people, I have nothing to do with the visual arts people, because it was the first time we were talking together. It was not easy, I think, I remember that. But in the end it was worth. And then I remember there was lots of meetings with UNESCO and all these small organizations in Newcastle and Bogota. So this was really important that we work together, right?
Well, you made it happen.
I think after the World Congress in Hong Kong, this was a time when Anne Kuo from InSEA appeared, and other people, Rita was there, but it was a chance where we could, I remember going to the Hong Kong government and raising the money to be able to bring people from other world associations within the Alliance to Hong Kong. And this was a really important reflection on the kind of rapidly increasing authority that we were gaining, because first of all, they took the Alliance seriously, and they took the short document, the declaration, very seriously, because we were talking about instability within the social and economic realms, and particularly manifested in how do you teach for a rapidly changing world. We needed to advocate that really quickly. And at the end of the World Congress in Hong Kong of IDEA, we began the first World Summit, but we didn't know whether it would be called a summit at that point. We were toying with the idea of World Creativity Forum, but that already existed. We wanted to find some way of showing the scale of our vision, but with at the same time not being pompous, and we wanted to distinguish it from a conference, and we wanted overall to underline that this was political. This was about policy making. This wasn't an academic forum. It wasn't a research forum. It was using research and using practice to really give foundations to policy making and policy proposing. It was the first time I'd heard anyone say, like Doug, saying, we represent, Doug, I seem to remember you even gave a greater figure. I think you said something like, we represent something like 5 million practitioners across our different associations. And that's a very considerable body of knowledge and a body of expertise.
Yeah, so maybe about the development and after the following years, maybe Rita, she can also tell her story.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of work done before I was involved. I mean, certainly that First World Congress was so influential. I mean, I attended that. I was a member of the InSEA World Council at that time, so I was very involved in that Congress, and I remember everything that Doug and others have said here today. We knew full well it was a very political statement, and we were taking a stand on that. And I distinctly remember feeling the power of the whole, and that there was something really important that was emerging here. So in those other years, the next few years, ANQO and InSEA had her own challenges. And so quickly I became more of the rep, even when ANQO was president. So, and then I stayed involved with the World Alliance while I was president, and then as press president. So I was involved for quite a while. And I would say in those years, we were trying hard to make sure that we continued to keep that presence very strong with either annual or biannual events of some nature. And certainly across our organizations to make sure that we were finding ways to network, to advocating for the arts, and to really promote our case. Probably the biggest event, and this is where Larry comes in and needs to talk about, but where the Second World Congress came in, and certainly the Seoul agenda was extremely important. And as a person who was not as involved as Larry was, but I was certainly involved from an InSEA perspective and with the World Alliance, that there again, I think many of us built upon the advocacy efforts of that World Congress, and were able to take it back to our countries, take it back to our organizations, and use that as a very strong springboard for continuing our work. I know that since then there's been talk of having another World Congress, and that has not happened yet, at least. I do think it is something that, as an alliance, we continue to think about, how we work together and how can we strengthen our work together. And, I see some really interesting things bubbling up across issues like sustainability, the environment, and other very, whether it's refugees, immigration, there's so many matters that we can work together on across our organizations. But I think right now, since you're kind of talking about the development, I think one thing that really needs to be elaborated upon in this meeting is the Seoul agenda, because it was so pivotal to the World Alliance and everything that's happened. So if you don't mind, I'd like to pass it over to Larry.
I may be out of order though from the agenda, but I'm happy to talk about it at any time. Teresa? Should I talk about the Seoul agenda now?
Yes,
then?
please.
Okay.
Okay. Well,
it's very interesting to me that the political background of the First World Congress, World Conference, obviously affected the second one, and I wish I had known more about decision making, but I wasn't able. I wasn't a fly on the wall, but somehow it was announced at the end of the First World Conference that there would be a second one, and it would be in 4 years, and it would be in Korea. So that was already pre-decided, because I know that it would have required the Korean government to have made a commitment to a lot of money. They spent a very lot of money on that Second World Conference. And so they must have decided that they wanted to do that in advance. And when I came on board, I was invited to be the general rapporteur. It was told to me that what Korea wanted was an action plan, that the first World Conference had produced this document that you've been all talking about, which was called the roadmap, which was had talked a lot about the value of arts education, but didn't give any specific instructions to anybody on what to do. So the intent was this had to be some kind of a plan, an action plan, but it wasn't able to have, and again, this is negotiation between Korea and the UNESCO, and Korea did want there to be points of evaluation where you could tell, have we been achieving the Seoul Agenda? They wanted it actually to have deadline dates and so on. And UNESCO said, no, you can't do that, which I think had to do with the type of conference it was. It was not a ministerial conference. It was a conference of experts. So the expert conference can't give directions to the member states, I suppose that's it. So, but it had to be an action plan. So there was, first of all, a steering or an advisory committee that met 1 year in advance, and I managed to meet all the good meetings. I managed to miss all sorts of good meetings in Paris. I love being in Paris, but I had another commitment at that time. I couldn't be in Paris. So Tintti, were you there? You were there representing us on that occasion as well, I believe, for the very first meeting of the advisory committee for the Second World Conference. Were you there? And I believe you represented us.
Yeah.
Yes, you were there, but I wasn't able to be there. So when I arrived at the World Conference, there was a group that had already, well, I was on the emails in between. There were emails back and forth all year. And what happened through those emails was that each time there was another email, there was another goal or point that had to be included. So it became a very, very long shopping list of we want this, we want that, we want the other thing, we want these things, and we want those things. It was extremely long. And I'm proud of my contribution, which was, my contribution was to say, you can't have a shopping list this long, nobody will follow it, nobody will pay any attention to it. We have to make it smaller, we have to make it organized, we have to put it into categories. So we put it into categories of 3 goals, and each goal had 3 or 4 or 5 sub goals, which were called strategies. And then each strategy was provided with certain action items so that you could, if you did this, if you increased teacher, if you increased or made, if you made arts education a subject in teacher education, that would meet a strategy, and that strategy would relate to the goal of creating a higher level of quality, right? So structuring it, this is what I'm very proud of doing. One night, it was one of those terrible nights when you think, no, we can't do this. What are we supposed to do? And I thought, well, if I play with the goals, what will happen? And it kind of fell into place. It just simply fell into place. But it was not only the steering committee or the advisory committee that decided what went into the Seoul Agenda. Very much so, because I was the rapporteur, I was in charge of the group that brought the information from the sessions. So this problem that Doug had, where he wasn't shown what was reported, that attitude was completely gone. If you had wanted to see anything, you could have seen it. You would simply come in and I would have showed it to you, because it was a room full of very high level UNESCO staff members who were going out and collecting the information, bringing it back. I was, well, with Tim, who was the highest level UNESCO person who was there working with me, we put it together into this document. We kept building, we had to make a report on the whole conference. And then while we're making the report, We took from that report items and put them in the sole agenda. Also, so every presentation was considered, everything that happened at the conference was somehow included in the sole agenda. Either it was a new idea that we included, or it was a very familiar idea that we said, yes, this is already in the sole agenda. In addition to that, anyone could talk to me during the conference. I just was available, and everyone did. I've like to say that it was my only experience in my life where I was actually lobbied by people, lobbying in the sense of people coming to me and saying, you have to include this, you have to include that. And I was able to say either, please write it down so I can know what you're saying, or what terminology would you use, or come to the office and we'll write it together, or, you know, or else I was able to say, actually, that is one of the main points. So thank you for talking to me, and I can assure you that your views are being heard. So it was very much a case of the experts who were at that conference who got to have input into the sole agenda. So it wasn't a political document, except in the sense that it had to be an action oriented. It had to be an action plan. Had to be an action plan. That was the political agenda. But apart from which made sense to me, I saw no reason why we shouldn't do that. And I'm very pleased with the way it turned out. I should add that there was quite a lot of editing that went on after the conference. Obviously, things were in very temporary state of writing at the time of the conference, and then we were able to refine it afterwards. So maybe that's enough talking about it, if there were questions or thoughts or other people were involved. But I just wanted to clarify how different it was, that it was very inclusive, it was very respectful of all of the presentations that happened. It included advice only from practitioners and researchers. There were no political expectations put on it at all. It was so different that I have to give credit to your team, to the founding members of WAAE for that challenging document. But also, I think that the government of Korea had a different idea. I think they had a very different idea of what kind of a conference they wanted to run, and they had very high expectations of it. And so I give them full credit. And by the way, the fact that the sole agenda was endorsed by UNESCO, all member states of UNESCO, and unanimously endorsed by the member states of UNESCO the following year, was very much because of the behind the scenes work of the government of Korea. So we owe them quite a lot. If we think the sole agenda is a valuable document, we really owe a lot to the government of Korea.
I have a question. May I? I have this impression that in the sole agenda there was there was more importance on teachers than in the roadmap. The roadmap was more about cultural education, about art, and the sole agenda put the focus on education.
And that would very much be because of the expert input that was there. And also there are two preliminary statements. There's a kind of an introduction to the sole agenda, which says something about how it came about. And then there's a kind of a prelude or a preparatory piece which summarizes what the sole agenda is. There's probably some language in that about the roadmap. I have to confess that the roadmap was not, that it was assumed that the points of the roadmap were covered well in the roadmap, and that we're building from there onwards. So we didn't start with the roadmap, but I think we started very much with the views of the steering committee, the advisory committee, their views on what parts of the roadmap were really important. It also has to do with who was invited to that conference. You always have to, there were 300 people or something at that conference, and who were the people that were invited? I had nothing to do with the invitations, but it was a very diverse group of presenters and attendees.
Teresa, can I come in on that? I'd just like to say that I think that was a very significant, we had a second phase. The first phase, really, for me, for 2 years, the Alliance was learning to live together and listen to one another and work together. I think, without judging that in any way, I think we all had very different ways of working together, and probably they came from our different artistic languages. And I think, but also the fact that IDEA was the youngest member of that alliance, because we were coming, you know, with InSEA and ISME, we were meeting people or organizations that had 20 years more experience and, you know, had worked in other ways. But I think we spent our 2007 and 2008 learning to work together. And at the same time, people were saying, we need to make sure that we're not just speaking to formal education. We need to also be including, because in the majoritarian world, formal education isn't the main form of education. You know, it would be in what's called community education or popular education. But I think we were also listening to people like Anne Bancroft and other people saying we need to speak to people other than ourselves. You know, we need to be networking with civil society. We need to be creating the foundations for a new paradigm of education, which was post-industrial and was looking in a very visionary way at a sustainable world. So I think there were these two powerful energies. One of them was this question of, one was internal and the other was external. And then I think the second phase were these 5 regional Alliance for Arts Education summits. And those brought together practitioners, particularly in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. It brought together people from outside school, but who were also bringing energy to a new paradigm of, or an ancient paradigm of education. So I think that meant that we came into contact with people who were not normally inside the universities, but were bringing a dialogue between the universities and other forms of education into focus. And by the time I remember this well in the advisory committee, I got the impression that the Koreans wanted our proposals for every round table, for every workshop. They had this diversity of education inside South Korea, but they really wanted our recommendations, so that we had, as I think you rightly remember, Larry, we had a theatre educationalist from Palestine, we had a theatre educationalist from Zimbabwe. You know, we had a diversity of people opening the Second World Conference. And I think that gave an energy as well. So I would just give that extra value, Teresa, that's, you know, the courage of the World Alliance to experiment, to listen to one another, and to find ways of bringing together, of creating, if you want, a consensus in practice.
Also, as I was mentioning that, even just the selection of who they invite to the conference makes the conference different, makes it come out differently. I also realized that why did they select me to be the general rapporteur? They were obviously casting around for somebody who would do whatever that was that they thought needed to be done. I also wanted to mention that some of the people who, yeah, that's interesting. It's good to have this conversation. Some of the people who came to lobby me And I remember Anne Bancroft coming and sitting down across from me at breakfast one time and saying, "Now, Larry, I think there was still a suspicion or a worry or a concern that the expert voices wouldn't be heard. I think there may have been some carryover from the First World Conference. You know, the feeling that it's a fait accompli, and people didn't want there to be a fait accompli. They wanted to make sure they had input. And so indeed it was set up so they could have input, and they did have input, but I think there was still a lingering concern that this would be somehow a politically motivated document. Oh, one more thought about it, and that is that the first two goals of the Seoul agenda, so for accessibility is the one and for quality is the other, those were sort of, you know, those did not require a lot of brain work and consideration. They were sitting there waiting to be acquired. But the third goal, applying arts education in situations where the arts can make a difference, I believe that was in the back of the mind of the organizers as well. It was, but it did come from, every point came from an expert or from the, but I believe that in addition to wanting it to be an action-oriented, you know, plan, I believe that there was an expectation that applying the arts to the goals of UNESCO would be somehow a part of that. And it was at a time when there was a lot of resistance to application of the arts, or thinking of the arts being somehow undermined when they were being applied in education or in other settings. And I don't know if that concern has disappeared in the world, but it's certainly, I think that the points that if you read that third goal and all of the strategies and action items, it makes wonderful sense. And actually there is a lot of overlap between quality and the application.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I'm just thinking that 10 years later, maybe more than 10 years, in Frankfurt, and maybe Joachim can tell us a bit about Frankfurt, there was a need to revise those goals in light of climate change, in light of the young people activism, and maybe Joachim, do you want to tell your story?
Yes, and thank you all. It's really interesting to remind, to remember, and to know more than I knew before about the first preparations and these things. And in fact, for us as really drama teacher association in schools, formal education, yeah, it was such a big thing, yeah, to have the authorities advocacy, yeah, from the International Association, United Nations for Culture and Education, UNESCO, and well, it is a small anecdote. I don't know if this is the right word, but yeah, it was really like that when I came back from Seoul and presented the Seoul agenda to our government and to a Ministry of Education. The first question I got was, sorry, what is UNESCO? You know, I said, what's that? Yeah, that's, we thought of, fantastic, yeah, having the help, yeah, from the International United Nations Association, or no, institution, yeah, where Germany, of course, is part of, yeah, and as we have our educational systems divided in these 16 states. So it was like, yeah. And you understand that we thought it was a wonderful progress, a big step, and such a big help, and therefore such a big political point to have this Seoul agenda, besides, of course, the roadmap. Yeah, and with all these concrete things Larry already told about, and then we noticed that it did not work. Yeah, and of course, yeah. Nowadays, some of our politicians, they oh wow, they know what UNESCO is, and they even sometimes talk about like something like Seoul agenda, but it's not like that. But we have an educational system in which every child has access to arts education in every school, because school is the only base where every child is inside. Yeah? And so, sorry, I don't want to educate you. You know that, but that was therefore it was so important to have this summits and this big conferences, which were really an opener for us. Yeah, and but we were not able to bring it down to our educational system up to now. Yeah, and that was one of my motivations to say, okay, yes, let's have WAE conference in Frankfurt. Well, because I'm in Frankfurt and I could organize it, so and could look for the money and all these things you need. So just to have another step, yeah, not really forward, but calling again to implement Seoul agenda not only into our German education system, of course, but yeah, to remind UNESCO not to forget and still and again, yeah, insist to find solutions for Seoul agenda in the countries, because the states are well, there are the ministries which have to do that. And that's the character of the Frankfurt Declaration. Also, you know that. And in fact, I was very happy that we had a representative of UNESCO in our conference, and I'm still in contact with him. And it was again, I think it was again South Korea, yeah, in which who made a proposal, a motion in the last general, what's it called, General Assembly of UNESCO in 2021 to remind, oh yes, there was something, yes, was it Seoul agenda? Oh yes, we remember somehow. And even if we have cancelled this department, yeah, we can and should reactivate this process. Yeah, sorry. I need another concrete question, not to go too far away.
Yeah.
Thank you.
May I ask a question? So in terms of mission of the Alliance, because till now we are talking a lot about UNESCO and the way the Alliance is linked with UNESCO, but do you think we only rely on this link, or can we exist without the link to UNESCO?
May I? Or
That's for everyone who wants to reply.
Okay.
Well, I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just no. I think that's the point. We need the WAE as an example for us. Sorry, we in Germany, yeah, should need WAE as an example for not compete, not being art, fine arts education, music education, drama education, dance education in competition. Yeah, because in Germany, in fact, we are in competition. Yeah, and this is a real problem. But to see we can work together, and if we work together, we can influence policy. That was the wonderful message from WAE and these conferences.
I suppose.
Yes. Okay, Larry.
Sorry, go ahead, Diederik. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, hearing this conversation, I think it's very important to keep this connection with UNESCO, because UNESCO is able to really influence and urge countries and ministries to act. And when we lose this connection and we are only acting on ourselves, which is okay to me, but then we lose also this line of influence on international discussion with regard to education. And I think that would be very big loss.
I agree with Diederik. I was thinking I interpreted the question to mean, what if there was no UNESCO? And if there was no UNESCO, then WAE would be even more important, even more essential. But I agree with Diederik.
Can I say, I had my raising hand, but who is leading?
Yes, please, Tintti, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to thank first Joachim, because when we had last November the IDEA Europe meeting in Norway, you gave all of us a very urgent task to contact our UNESCO commissions in every country. And I immediately, when I came back, I sent the message to Finnish Commission, and Sabrina Holmström, who is the delegate in UNESCO on behalf of Finland, she said that, thanked a lot, and said that she is going to vote for this, that it will be in there. So I was very happy. I had not known without you giving me this message. That was one thing. The other thing I wanted to say is, like a little part of history, is a funny thing that 50 years ago, when FIDEA was founded, we had in our constitution that we must have all art educators in our executive committee. So we had music teachers, we had visual art teachers, we have drama teachers. But later on, we changed it because we realized that the fact is, what you took up, that music and visual arts are based in the school, but drama not. So we left out those teachers. We had no quarrels in that sense, but in the executive committee. But we realized that we must concentrate on promoting drama and theatre in schools, because it was the only one which had no independent subject status that time. And this is still the fact in most countries, at least in European countries, but also in many African countries, it is different because they have a mixture of, but there are not so many countries in Europe where we have drama and theatre. Iceland, where we have our next Congress, is one of the brilliant examples that they have managed to put it there. But the last thing is that always the good strategy is that each organization, like InSEA and FISME and FIDEA, that we contact our national UNESCO commission and tell them what we are doing and ask them to promote it, because otherwise they don't know anything about it. So I have done all this UNESCO Art Week this year as well, and told them about our ringing the bells, opening, and all these things. And they always send me nice letters back and thank for that. And they put it in the websites.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tintti. I always send happy International Week of Art Education to my local UNESCO. Sometimes they reply. Wow. Rita, you wanted to add something about this?
There's other people with hands up, so go ahead.
So we have Dan and Sanja.
Sanja, I think you're before me.
Well, yes, but then I said, oh, maybe not a good idea. But then, okay, I will say something, a few things. And exactly this is the thing about knocking on the doors of our UNESCO commissions. But as some of you or maybe all of you know, we had this really horrific disappointment when we had our IDEA Congress in Paris in 2013, and we had a session in the UNESCO headquarters, and actually we were informed that the department that is dedicated to arts education is closing because of the lack of funds, and that it is not anymore a priority or we're really, really shocked or moved with this situation. But then what we did, as Joachim suggested to Tintti, and we are reminding ourselves all the time, we should knock on the doors of our local commissions, actually, that are in collaboration with UNESCO. And what I wanted to share with you, the first thing that was brought to my attention when I knocked on the door of the commission. I said, what field are you? And I said, drama theater education, and also I'm interested in dance education, and I represented Center for Drama and Education and Art, CEDEUM. This is the organization that I'm leading in Serbia. So they said, there is a very interesting letter maybe we could share with you. And it was a thank you note from the delegation of South Korea, the conference of UNESCO on the 21st of November 2019, thanked Serbia that supported the resolution, and I wrote it down, resolution item 5.29, that stated that awareness of arts education and the International Arts Education Week. So I was really, I felt really good about that. Okay, Serbia supported it, but what's happening in Serbia? Are they really supporting it? Are the ministries supporting arts education in the right way? Especially drama, theater, dance that has not entered the schools. We have visual art and music. So actually, it's not so many things are happening. I want to thank Joachim, who really brought to me a very daring and very ambitious idea to map in the drama theater education world what is happening 10 years after the Seoul agenda. So what we did together, the two of us, was to create a whole series of webinars, Where Do We Stand?, where we were mapping region by region of in the world and asking, representatives to say, okay, so what is happening now? 10 years have passed. Is this document still valid? Is it accepted? Did things change? Did arts education become accessible to all? And it was really a tandem in part.
I cannot hear anybody.
Yeah, well, I think Sanja was muted.
She's left and she'll come back.
Yeah, so maybe Dan, if you want to come in.
Yeah, I want to come back to your question, Teresa, because I think it's a very, very good question, and it's not taking anything away from any other response. But I also want to make present Liani Henschke from InSEA and Ralph, because I think both of them illustrate another kind of collaboration or alliance, which without diminishing UNESCO. I think what they did was they had alliances with industry, and they had, particularly in the realm of music, Liani came with that history, and Ralph came with a history of alliances with industry or with foundations outside of UNESCO. And that gave us greater authority to speak to UNESCO, but also in our case, for instance, UNESCO was extremely weak in Latin America, in the Latin America that I knew. And what the Alliance did with its history as it was beginning to accumulate was have access to ministers. So it wasn't that UNESCO was irrelevant, it just meant that we could go direct to the minister saying, look, here is an institution. And this institution is not just an institution made up of volunteers, but there are partners who are powerful and who are also thinking about education for a rapidly changing world, and a world with, not just in terms of rapid technological change, but also thinking of how do you educate young people for permanent change. And I can remember, I want to just bring this in a little humanity of the human touches. I remember meeting Rita for the first time, and how interesting it was for someone coming in with a very clear vision, but a very open vision about partnerships. I remember Ralph coming in shorts. First of all, he appeared in Taiwan, I think in 2008, and he brought so much hilarity to our conversations. But it was also a kind of irreverence. It was something like, we can, of course, we need to partner with UNESCO, but we need money. And as the point was made, yes, UNESCO had lost a great deal of money when Trump was elected, lost the contribution from the United States. But in Brazil, UNESCO was homeless, completely homeless. So I think it was important that the Alliance, as it gained self-confidence, also started to look at industry and other partners to say, we need to build an environment for policy change. It wasn't and I can remember clearly the phrase, we can't be UNESCO-centric. When we're talking about networking, talking about strategy, UNESCO is one of our historical partners, but we need to be thinking about how we can bring in the resources to fund scholarships, to fund prizes, to fund conferences and everything else. So, and in some ways, the World Arts Education Week was one of the symbolic things that we could do, just as giving recognition to good practice. But we needed partners that could also give us the capital, not just the political capital, but the means to be able to launch long-term research projects. And I think that was a dream. For me, that was perhaps the greatest influence on my thinking from World Alliance, which is that we needed research projects of 20 years, 40 years, where we could see the outcome on children going through arts education inside and outside formal education, and see how they developed as adults, how they developed as practitioners outside of the arts, how it impacted on the other professions. And I think those are key debates in the years leading up to the Seoul Agenda. But I think I want to really say your question is excellent, Teresa, because it focuses us to think about industry and think about technology as partners for making arts education valid beyond a particular corner of the syllabus.
Could I comment here? I think Dan's absolutely right that we need not to restrict ourselves to UNESCO, because there is such difference between countries in the way that UNESCO is regarded and acted upon in terms of policy direction. The United States is so huge. It's like living in multiple countries. You know, the difference between the North and the South is really immense. And if in general, the US doesn't pay very much attention to UNESCO policy direction, there is a kind of an arrogance about self-determination in the United States from state to state. So I think the ways in which we communicate with the field and with the people, the practitioners, with the policymakers, needs to be differently constructed depending upon the location in the world in which we are. We need different. You know, we need our people in each of the world locations where we're working to examine the ways in which policy can manifest and what are the pathways and partnerships that we need in order to make that happen. And that could be a very interesting conversation at a World Congress. How do we communicate and who do we partner with in order to manifest the most significant change that we're looking for?
Thank you, Doug. So Rita, maybe now? We are already the last part, I think.
I'll just add a little bit. I think that, you know, InSEA and ISME were literally created by UNESCO after the end of the Second World War in an effort to try and create world peace through the arts. And my understanding of the relationship of those two organizations with UNESCO in those first 40, 50 years or so is that there was a, you know, although it existed, it wasn't necessarily as close as it could be. And indeed, ISME, I think, lost some ground with another music organization that gathered more clout with UNESCO. So while UNESCO is not probably the primary reason for the World Alliance to exist, I think it is still a strong one, not only for us as a collective, but I think for the organizations that, you know, that they have some responsibility to in the long term. For UNESCO itself, there was a time when they really understood arts education. I know that their funding is no longer, but I sincerely hope that there will be a time in the future when arts education will be funded again. And I'm hoping that the World Alliance and InSEA and ISME and every individual organization, as they wish, will have some influence there. I know that the World Alliance also discussed at one time about, you know, making stronger alliances with other world organizations. I'm trying to remember the acronym for it's like the ministers of culture in each country have their own group, and that was one that, you know, we did have many conversations with. I remember during with Dan and others having those conversations, probably during the World Summits. And I would encourage us to continue to try and to do that. We also talked about World Health Organization and others. I think as an alliance, we do have a voice that actually can speak to other international organizations. I realize our capacity is still founded on volunteerism, and so it's still up to our, you know, the capacity any one individual or the group has. So I know that there's a limitation there. However, I do think it should be in our imaginary that this is that it's not just UNESCO. UNESCO is very important, and we need to maintain an alliance with them, but there's other alliances that can be made. And of course, we need to continue strengthening our own alliance amongst ourselves. So I just hope that that's part of the future, is that we continue to reach out to other kind of networks that where the arts can be influential.
Wow, thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. So in Wednesday, there was the open house in the celebrations of the Alliance for the week. And Christopher is there. He was presenting in the open house. And what he said, Rita, about, for example, working with health organizations or with other kind of organizations, it's more important, I think, than 10 years ago. And peace education is again in the red point, at least in Europe. And in this webinar, there was people from Bosnia talking about the post-war. There were two people from theater from Kiev, from Ukraine, and they were telling us how they are surviving and how they are resisting in the basement and doing arts, and how they involve other people and to be resilient and to get hope. And I think this new alliance, because this is a new alliance, it is also, as Dan said, it's a network. It's really a network, and people need to talk together. It's important. In this webinar we discuss, it is important to be linked to big organizations, but it's also important to do small things. I don't know if Christopher wants to say something. He was there. So the voice of someone young.
Thank you. Oh, am I visible?
No.
Oh, let me turn on my camera. Okay.
I want to apologize about my internet. It just broke. I just want to say this. I didn't go anywhere. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yes, I am so touched by this, because I've long been searching for somewhere where I can voice the concerns of the arts in the Caribbean, because I am from Grenada, in the southern part of the Caribbean. I studied the arts in Jamaica, and I realized that the support, although the arts is gaining a lot, real great momentum, it is not strengthened or supported by the policies of government. They only come to it when there are functions, there are festivals, or there are delegates coming in. They would call the artists and the actors to do performances. But beyond that, in the curriculum, there's nothing existing. Just a few schools who would do it based on the teachers' interest. And I have been doing it. I started it when I realized that there was no room for it in the school that I was. I started my own program. And because it became therapy for a lot of the students, we were able to unfold a lot of the abuse that was happening within the institutions and within the homes. And so we even uncovered that there were a lot of police officers and so on, high profile persons who were abusing children. And I didn't know, out of the drama, they started speaking out. And so they shut down my program and took me out. The government actually did it. They sent the chief education officer to get me out of the school and put me somewhere. So I'm not teaching drama anymore. I'm teaching French. And so I was taken totally away from the arts, although I'm the most qualified person in the country with the bachelor's and up to the master's level. And I'm not of any value. I was taken away from the community college, because although the principals requested me, then it became a political game. So yes, we need the support in the Caribbean. It's not just in my school or my country, but the arts need more involvement with stronger voices so that we can rally around. And of course, the presence of UNESCO is in the Caribbean, but they are buying, I think UNESCO is buying the voices of the policymakers who are not telling the truth. And our country is infested with a lot of creative artists who want to make this their profession. So that's why I started my school. And there are a number of persons requesting to come to join my school, but I don't have any funding. I can't do it alone. I don't have a building. I'm doing it in my house. And they are coming. Over 50 persons are coming to my place where I can train them. So we need an intervention in the Caribbean, but I'm not giving up. And that is the struggle, but the arts is very powerful into gender-based violence at the same time and some means of expression. That's my 2 pence.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. So any final comments for the future of the Alliance? What direction to follow?
I just wanted to say that back in 2011, the sole agenda was endorsed by UNESCO, but it's actually the World Week of Arts Education that was founded at that time. That was actually the goal of the motion, was to found the week. And so I'm very pleased that WAAE has taken that week on as best it can. I know that the organization I'm involved with in Canada also makes an effort to celebrate that week each year, and other organizations do as well. But the WAAE is providing us with these wonderful posters and with guidance on them on what you might do during that week. So I just wanted to point out the importance of being given a week at the world level by UNESCO. So UNESCO owes something to arts education anyway, because they founded the week.
Yes.
They established the week unanimously, even though they had no staff to work on it.
Yeah, thank you, Larry, for bringing up the week, International Week of Arts Education. That this year it seems that UNESCO forgot about that. But anyway, the Alliance is there and we remind, and many other organizations are celebrating. So before we go, I would like to invite you all for the next Alliance Summit. It will be in the island of Madeira in Portugal, in the middle of Atlantic. And it will be 1st March 2023. So I hope you can come and we can discuss and we can share our ideas and make us visible in this presential summit. Finally.
And Teresa, can we also remind there will be an online session introducing this Madeira conference, and it is planned in October. Is it that the date, the month?
Yes, it will be an online teaser to announce the conference. So we'll send an email to everyone, and we really hope everyone can come, because we really need to be together again.
Teresa, can I just add something here?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that this week is also the week when 11 years ago, one of our great arts educators was murdered in the Amazon. And I remember well that Ralph spoke at the World Alliance Summit in that year, and not reminded, but brought that to the attention of how there are many arts educators who are also defenders of the forests and of human rights. And I think when you talk about the future, I think it's a great tribute to the Frankfurt Summit that this was really a focus, the question of climate collapse. And I'm thinking particularly when Christopher Williams was speaking about trauma or about healing, just thinking about young people who've gone through the pandemic, and particularly inside Brazil, the emphasis is on catching up on lost academic time, rather than rethinking the paradigm of education, which puts, the ecological dimension at the core of all preparation for life, really. And I'm also thinking, I'm not just thinking about Maria Silva, who is the arts educator, the theatre educator, and visual arts educator, who was murdered. But I'm thinking that, you know, the trauma for young people who have lost their right to the future. Because, and I think perhaps if we're thinking about the focus of the next decade, I think it's going to be thinking about children and young people. It's going to be, how do we deal with that trauma of the pandemic? But also, how do we ensure that young people, where they live, can be prepared for a radical transformation? You know, so I think that's my contribution, I think, to, you know, how we might be imagining future summits. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. You're real welcome. Sanja, I think I'm going to pass on you now.
Yes.
You have your bell?
Yes, of course. And I was just, when we had the webinar with Tintti, I was so happy when I saw that Prologue Theatre, I think from Canada, made a wonderful compilation of different people playing different instruments, ringing the bells for arts education. It is something that Tintti gave to us as a gift many, many years ago, as a very small but very efficient action of advocacy to ring the bells for arts education all over the world, and to remind people how important to make noise, to make ourselves visible. As Emily said, that the name of her conference was Visible Voices. And I think this is the visibility that we need, that we can do with some sonorous, in a sonorous way. And we have our bells. Teresa, you have yours. You can use your cups or some little spoons or anything you have, or just sing or clap your hands and put on your microphone. So even though we are through Zoom, but I think we can make some noise for arts education. And we can start.
Educação em Artes no Brasil, para a Semana